Now, I wanted to ask you a question. As we were talking about medication, I was sharing with you that I took a lot of medication. I don't take any medication now. I just take supplements now. But what do you believe is the reason that modern society tends to gravitate towards like pills and quick fixes rather than addressing the root causes, I should say, of alignments?
I agree with you 100%, and you basically answered the question. Um, from an Ayurvedic and traditional Chinese medicine perspective, and I've studied both traditional Chinese medicine and Ayurveda. Again, I am not a doctor, but I incorporate many different aspects of both as a yoga therapist. And I always tell people, as a yoga therapist, it's often more about therapy than yoga, because a lot of times we may not do anything physical, but I'm trained in acupressure, and I'm trained, I know a lot about the meridians and all that. And what both traditional Chinese medicine and Ayurveda have in common is it's about going to the root problem, identifying the root problem, and finding the balance to prevent for well-being. So we have to have balance from well-being. And from an Eastern perspective, and again, both Ayurveda and traditional Chinese medicine, we have the elements, the 5 elements. And those elements have to be in balance. And there are many different layers of elements and the balance, because in Ayurveda, it's also very much about, I'll just mention the word guna, which is food. Different food has different gunas. So you want to eat a sattvic diet. In one of the chapters in my book, it's all about a sattvic diet. And another chapter in my book is about a sattvic lifestyle. Sattvic means pure, and it means neutral and balanced, as opposed to the other gunas are kind of, let's just say, like caffeine is one type. It's considered rajasic. The other kind, like alcohol. So in other words, one kind of rattles you, and then the other one depresses you. And all foods have those different traits. And so from a sattvic diet or a sattvic lifestyle, we are supposed to do things that are neutral and calming and pure. And I'm sorry, but I believe most medications are not sattvic, because they're doing something to us. We all know that any medication you do somehow alters you. I remember once I had toe fungus, and I remember going to the doctor, and the doctor said, you know what? The medicine that you need to get rid of it, it's going to ruin your kidneys. And I just used tea tree oil instead, and I treated it with tea tree oil. But my point is that traditional meds are too altering, and they're not going to keep us balanced. I'm 65 years old, and I aside from my 2 childhood diagnoses, I am also insulin resistant, and I take 0 meds. I manage everything through an Ayurvedic lifestyle. And again, it's about, it does have to do with diet, but it's also, what time do you go to bed, and when do you go to bed, and what do you do? And I take no medicine, but I also take no other kinds of drugs, such as alcohol. And, even coffee is considered a drug from an Ayurvedic perspective. So a long story short is, some drugs, of course, are necessary. I would never tell somebody not to take drugs when they're necessary. But when my daughter was born 35 years ago, it was in South America, and it had to be a C-section. I went to an acupuncturist to avoid the C-section. And so I've always been interested in integrative health And anyway, it was a C-section, which today, in today's age, if I had gone to a birthing center, a midwife, I'm sure the C-section would not have been necessary. But where I was living, hey, that was what they did. But the next morning, because it was like 10 o'clock at night when she was born. And of course, I was like out of it, even though I wasn't given total anesthesia. It was just, the spinal. Anyway, I was out of it because I've always been drug free. So, even if back in the day when I was in when I was in college, if I would drink a beer, I would feel out of it. Anyway, so in the morning when I wake up in the hospital, the nurse comes by with all these different pills. Well, what are these? Painkiller. I don't need a painkiller. What do I need a painkiller for? I would rather feel the pain and know what's going on. It's not like it's gonna impede anything. I can deal with pain. And then she had, all these other things. I'm like, I don't need those. But anyway, I'm sorry. I didn't get back to your
Oh, that's okay.
Reinforce what you were saying. Most people want the quick fix. And when I studied Ayurveda in India, my doctor, who is featured in my book, he said, most people want a quick fix. Ayurveda, you have to do it always. You have to always be conscious of what you're doing. And again, as a diabetic, it kills me when I see people who are giving themselves insulin, they're having to shoot themselves up with insulin a couple times a day, and then they eat all sorts of junk. And they are not physically active, but again, they prefer to just give themselves a shot of insulin.
Right. And you remind me, because I had gestational diabetes with my second son. And, it was the last month that they said, okay, you have gestational diabetes. And I remember being monitored throughout that month constantly. And then when I went to the hospital, because they wanted to do a C-section because we don't want the child to be too big. And my first son was born vaginally. It wasn't a C-section. And so I was like, okay, I was just going to trust the doctors, right? And what wound up happening is that when they inserted whatever they were to induce my labor or to dilate my cervix faster. I'm sorry. Let me take that back. That was an emergency C-section. Originally, they were going to go ahead and induce me and have him be born earlier because of the gestational diabetes. And so what happened is that they had inserted that thing, and then I was dilated. And when I was dilated, I thought then my water broke. But no, the nurse came and she opened up the blanket like this. She was like freaked out. It was all blood. I was hemorrhaging. My body was reacting to whatever they were inserting in me. And so unfortunately, someone else was in the having a baby in the C-section room. That was like the only room available. And baby was losing oxygen and blood. I was hemorrhaging. So both of us, our lives were at risk. And I was just thinking about wow, what if I was just supposed to be natural, without knowing that I had gestational diabetes, would they have just had me deliver naturally? Or if they were to insert that in me, that's causing both of our lives to be at risk. Well, what wound up happening is that they put me under. Then I had the C-section, and he was not responding. No oxygen. He had hypoxia. And so poor little baby was in the NICU for a long time. And luckily, miracle, praise God, he was fine.